1883. Deep in the Dakota Territory Badlands, a bitter gale howled off the Black Hills peaks, carrying grit and the harsh promise of winter. Catherine Hale lingered right on the edge of Deadwood General Supply Post, gripping a threadbare wrap tight against the chill, while her wicker trug hung hopelessly bare. "No tabs," the voice snapped. The merchant dismissed her, instantly retreating into his wares. Denied once more. Swallowing her pride, she offered a silent nod and descended those timber steps with defiant posture, though gnawing hunger had ravaged her insides for 2 days. Worse still, her little boy was surviving on nothing but a single bread crust since daybreak. Her frayed skirts swept across the hardened earth as she fought back the burning tears. Breaking down here in public simply was not an option. Just across the dirt, a lone drifter propped himself near the stable timber frame limbs, folded, brim pulled deep to shadow his gaze. He wore weathered but tidy layers and leather scarred by miles of rough country. He exuded an eerie, immovable calm, suggesting absolutely nothing could rattle this stranger. His stare stayed fixed squarely on her, utterly unapologetic. "Turned you down for rations, huh?" His gravelly, confident tone broke the quiet. She froze momentarily before offering a subtle dip of her head, glancing defensively toward her rig. "I will manage somehow." Pushing away from the wood beam, the shadowy figure closed the distance. "Walk with me," he offered, simple as a spoken pact. "I will ensure you eat." She paused, white-knuckling her woven container. "We are complete strangers." "Makes no difference," he replied. "There is a hungry mouth relying on you." Case closed. She stared at the boots and soil separating them. "Handouts are not something I accept. Call it a meal, not a handout," he urged. "Let's move." That made her finally study his face intently. A deep gentleness lived in his stare, alongside faint laugh lines suggesting he used to know joy, even if those days were long buried. He hovered between youth and age, mid-30s perhaps. An intense, grounded aura radiated off him, instantly calming her own frayed nerves. She silently agreed. Acknowledging her choice, he pivoted, guiding the way over the thoroughfare toward a dirt-caked transport rig tied up nearby. Silas Whitlow, the man, introduced himself, gathering up the leather straps. "Hop on the bench or walk the trail." She pulled herself aboard. "Catherine Hale. My boy waits at our claim. Barely past the settlement line near the water." Silas snapped the lines. "Guess we are heading to the water then." They traveled without words, yet the stillness felt entirely safe, granting them both a rare peace. Timber groaned against the rugged path, while twilight cascaded over the ridges in brilliant amber hues. She observed his grip controlling the leathers, capable, scarred, unfaltering. It felt like lifetimes since a genuinely solid protector had crossed her path. Veering off the main track, they hugged the riverbed before a battered little cabin finally emerged. It was a desperate little shack, held together mostly by pitch and pure willpower. A painfully frail, shoeless child waited on the planks, tracking their arrival. "Your kid," the stranger murmured. "Yeah, Micah is his name. 7 years old." Silas gave a brisk nod. "Sharp kid." The wheels halted. She scrambled off the timber seat right as the child sprinted into her arms. Embracing him tightly, she whispered into his hair, "Brought some company home with us. He is bringing dinner." The little boy stared at the mysterious rider, utterly fascinated. "You really brought grub," Silas smirked. "Way better. How about wild hare broth?" The boy beamed. "Sure do." With that, the drifter started hauling down his heavy provisions. Cured pork, dry beans, spuds, milled flour, and a thick slab of venison wrapped in canvas. The sheer bounty stole Catherine's breath. She parted her lips to speak, but Silas simply met her gaze and muttered, "Time to cook." The cooking space felt cramped yet inviting once the hearth blazed. Silas sliced roots with practiced ease while Catherine kneaded dough for pan biscuits. Young Micah perched nearby, eyes blown wide by the rich scent of searing meat. "You handle a knife like a seasoned homesteader," Catherine noted, observing him closely. "Grew up on a cattle spread," he replied softly. "Lost my mother at 16. Picked up whatever skills I needed." She nodded, knowingly. Pa vanished before my earliest memories, he murmured, eyes cast down. Got any kin left? Silas gave a slow headshake. Only me. Catherine stirred the broth. Likewise. The fate of her late husband lingered unspoken. She withheld the tragic tale, and he respected the silence. Her unyielding frontier spirit and her son's survival were testament enough. No further explanation needed. Supper brought radiant heat to the shack, alongside joyful giggles Micah had not uttered in months. Later, Silas wipes down the timber table before stepping into the cold, while Catherine settled her boy. Emerging later, she found him resting against the weathered railing, staring out at the vast, starlit prairie. "I appreciate this," she whispered. His gaze shifted toward her. "My pleasure. You truly did not owe us anything." Felt right. She bridged the gap. "You've got a good heart." He brushed it off. Doubtful. "You do," she insisted firmly. Her tone carried a fragile certainty. It has been ages since anyone extended genuine grace out these parts. He held her stare, irises reflecting silver moonlight. "That does not need to be an isolated incident." Catherine swallowed hard. Her pulse raced, stripped of its usual frontier terror, replaced by an emotion long buried beneath dust. Absolute hope. You, sincere. Utterly. They lingered together, weathered planks groaning beneath leather boots. The untamed wilderness remained entirely silent, save for restless canyon winds howling. "Planning on returning come sunrise?" she pressed. "Absolutely," he vowed with steadfast conviction. A genuine, radiant grin broke across her face. Perfect. Silas tipped his brim. "Evening, Catherine." "Rest easy, Silas." He strolled down the dirt trail and boarded his rig, wooden axles groaning heavily as he pivoted toward civilization. Yet nearing the curve, he cast a glance back. She remained anchored on the porch, a lone silhouette tracking his departure, patiently awaiting tomorrow. Dawn ushered in a biting chill across the jagged glass, painting the horizon in faded crimson streaks. Catherine glided silently across the floorboards, feeding fresh timber to the hearth while prepping morning gruel. Micah shifted, remaining fast asleep. Pulling a knitted wrap tightly around her shoulders, she stepped outside into a crisp, forgiving chill. One solitary trail of horseshoe marks marred the frozen dirt. She analyzed the tracks from afar, gazing with the apprehension of holding a sealed, potentially life-altering telegram. The future remained an absolute mystery, yet her unspoken desires burned brighter than she could safely admit. Come mid-morning, rhythmic galloping echoed again, measured, calculated strikes impacting the hard, icy earth. She hastily dried her palms against her smock, pulse pounding with anticipation. Silas approached at a measured trot. A heavy duster shielded his neck from the biting gales. Swinging out of the saddle, he hitched his steed, securely locking onto her gaze with a silent, mutual understanding. "Navigate the trails without trouble?" she questioned, nervously dusting her hands off. "Sure did," he replied. "Path gets treacherous beyond the river, but my mount held steady." Clearing the doorway, she offered him shelter. "Step inside, assuming you ain't pressed for time. Got nowhere to be," he murmured, trailing her past the threshold as he respectfully laid his brimmed Stetson by the crackling fireplace. From his dark corner awake, young Micah studied the stranger with guarded curiosity. "You recall Mr. Whitlow here?" Catherine prompted softly. "Sure do, Mama," the lad replied, sitting taller, while their visitor nodded solemnly. "Good day, boy. Keeping busy with the homestead work?" The child darted a glance at his mother. "I haul timber and feed chickens." "Mighty fine labor," the drifter noted with utter respect. A pioneer claim requires brutal, daily sweat. Steaming water splashed into her wash bowl. "Got a broken perimeter out back. A buck breached it recently. If you possess some extra iron string, I could mend that gap for you." The rugged traveler volunteered, shedding his duster. "Got a spool stashed beneath the shed?" she murmured, secretly startled by how naturally this hardened wanderer fit into her lonely parlor. Peering through the glass, he muttered, "Best I tackle that before the earth thaws. That prairie gale bites hard today." As the stranger labored outside, the widow retrieved her woven mending box. Her son's garments were fraying badly at the joints, and frontier cloth was a rare luxury she could not squander. Stitching quietly, she kept a vigilant gaze fixed on the yard, observing the gunslinger as he repaired those splintered wooden posts with grim determination. Unlike solitary ranchers who babbled to ward off madness, he labored in complete silence. Every deliberate motion carried massive weight. When noon struck, the defensive boundary was completely restored. Returning indoors, his leather spurs were caked in muck, concealing a bleeding gash across his wrist he entirely ignored. She offered him a battered metal platter carrying yesterday's hardtack bread and some carefully preserved cuts of salted pork. Thawing his weary bones by the embers, he noted, "This here is a mighty fruitful territory. Fresh creeks and solid timber. Belong to my late mister," she replied, carefully looping her thread. "Traveled from Kansas 5 autumns past. He raised these timbers himself." The cabin fell utterly silent. "He'd perish out here." She offered a single somber nod. A brutal fever claimed him fast 2 seasons ago. Young Micah stepped outside to check the roost. A profound stillness stretched between them. Never awkward, just intensely heavy. Rotating his tin meal pan, the drifter murmured, "Laid my ma to rest near Laramie." She fancied those howling plains, claimed the gales stripped away lies. Catherine's eyes darted toward his face. "You stick around. A couple seasons. Took whatever jobs paid. Herded livestock up north. Laid down iron tracks. Kept roaming relentlessly ever since. You fixin' to plant roots this time around." Meeting her gaze, he challenged, "Got a compelling reason I should not?" She immediately abandoned her mending. "None that come to mind." Rising, he dusted the soot off his rough palms. "Heading for town. I will fetch iron spikes and salt if you are running empty. Require anything more?" Pausing briefly, she finally requested, "Look for window glass if they carry any. Got a dangerous splinter forming by the cook fire." The rugged man offered a curt affirmative. "I will scout for some." Escorting him outside, the brutal prairie gusts whipped violently at her woolen wrap. Swinging up, he methodically secured his leather tack. "I will return for the sun dips," he declared. "You carry no debt to this family," she countered, her tone unwavering. "Fully aware," the rider murmured. "Duty ain't what is bringing me back here." Acting on pure instinct, she stretched upward, gently sweeping frontier dirt from his heavy lapel. "Then I will be waiting." Tipping his worn brim in farewell, he spurred his mount down the dirt trail, never tossing a single glance backward. Yet she watched until his silhouette vanished past the distant ridge. Down where the frozen stream vanished into dense timber, that solitary shack smelled strongly of cured pork and smoldering ash. The kid bolted inside, beaming while clutching a wild feather. "Guess our guest ain't planning on leaving," the youngster smiled. A knowing smirk crossed her lips as she nervously traced a frayed seam. "Maybe he will not," she murmured. Splintering frost signaled his heavy cart rumbling back just before dusk, looking utterly battered by the gale, his heavy duster caked in frozen dirt. Leaving the roost at the stallion's approach, the matriarch frantically scrubbed grime onto her apron, exhaling thick plumes into the freezing void. The weary rider hauled a mysterious, tightly nailed box from the rig. "Soaking wet, yet sturdy. Scavenged those pains," he muttered. "Bartered my riding gear to survive. Some blacksmith out east still had a debt from my leather work last winter." Taking the heavy cargo, she whispered, "This stays hidden away until the snow melts." Repairing windows is useless before the thaw hits. Secured some heavy tarpaulin, though, he rasped. Should block that deadly draft from freezing us out. The timber door swung open, revealing the messy-haired youngster standing there. Chopped all the starter wood. Massive pile today. The drifter barely acknowledged him. Carried that load alone. Must have pulled the entire burlap bag. Complaining about it catching the threshold, the veteran advised not the opening shut. Moving forward. Prevents awful tearing. Stunned, the lad agreed and vanished inside. Moving closely beside him on the creaky deck, she observed, You instruct youngsters well. Rarely do he confess softly. Just recalling my own brutal youth out here. Probably would have survived easier having mentors who talked straight. Resting casually against the splintered jam, she countered softly, "You never hide the truth." His piercing gaze locked onto hers, completely unyielding under that battered Stetson. It is my only survival tactic. A sudden, bitter gust whipped dark strands across her face. Pinning the lock away while holding eye contact, she probed. "You handle rawhide repairs?" "Whenever survival demands it." Formerly ran dangerous courier routes for southern transport outfits. Riding gear deteriorates quickly. Fixing broken tack became a mandatory skill out there. Gesturing toward the crumbling shed, she mentioned, "Got abandoned riding equipment rotting inside. Ruined since last autumn. Fix that mess, and a precious jar of sweet fruit is yours. I will inspect the damage post-meal," he grunted. "Keep your damn payment." Retreating slightly to pull the entrance wide, she declared, "You are dining at our table tonight." Refusing to utter a single word, the weary stranger silently hung up his fedora. Dinner proved desperately watered down, barely thickened with meager root vegetables and wild grains. Yet the starving kid devoured 3 massive portions, while their guest completely licked his plate clean. Once the crude bowls were cleared, the matriarch unpacked her sewing by the roaring flames, while he meticulously inspected the ruined leather. Their quietness felt entirely transformed, no longer carrying that awkward, dangerous edge. Instead, it radiated an unspoken bond between survivors finally finding peace together. Ever consider planting roots, leaving this violent trail behind? She probed carefully, pushing steel wire through the rugged fabric. "Attempted that life once," he muttered darkly. "Up north. Corrupt landlord went bankrupt, betraying me by auctioning my sanctuary away." She acknowledged this tragic revelation silently. Out here, absolute loyalty was forged strictly through heavy, unspoken moments. This entire bloody territory. The deed belongs strictly to the boy she finally confessed. No frontier vault could claim it. Silas looked up. "That cleverness was not mine," she admitted. The old man held some wisdom. The drifter stopped prying right there. He simply hunched over, slicing fresh rawhide with his folding blade. Embers spat against the stones while the prairie gale worsened. Bedding down in the settlement, she questioned. "Got a loft over the stables," he muttered. "Keeps rain off. Those timber planks groan something fierce, though. Take that corner bed if the ride gets too bitter," she offered, eyes fixed on her needlework. "Hate being a burden." "You are not." Heavy silence fell, broken merely by sharp steel biting into tough hide. "Reckon I will camp here," he finally conceded. Putting her mended garments down, she pointed out. "Spare quilts wait in that chest." Testing the stiff harness, he pulled it taut. "I will mend this clasp come daybreak." She silently agreed. "Much obliged." Nearby little Micah shifted restlessly beneath his heavy woolen covers. Darkness brought brutal chills. Frosty gusts shoved against the timber joints like some unseen ghost. Placing the battered gear gently on the rough timber, the stranger headed for his bed. Catherine stood to smother the roaring flames, her scarred fingers unflinching. The crushing frontier burdens briefly lifted from her spine. Stopping near his resting spot, she lingered. "I place my faith in you," she murmured with conviction. Their gazes locked intensely. "Your instincts ain't wrong." Acknowledging this, her fingers briefly grazed his knuckles before she retreated into shadows. Vicious squalls screamed at the roof, yet a fierce protective heat lingered inside those walls. Once 7 days passed, the broken riding gear was fully restored. Thick oilcloth got hammered tight across that shattered glass pane, and the drifter formed a routine of showing up at dawn's break. He never bothered knocking. She memorized his heavy footfalls across the deck, always halting at the threshold, silently asking if he was still wanted. She consistently swung the latch wide before doubt could poison his mind. By Friday morning, massive damp flakes plunged from the bleak northern horizon in a slow, relentless assault. Guarding herself with a tightly pulled blanket, Catherine observed from her rear porch an iron wash bucket rapidly losing heat by her boots. The rugged man emerged carrying a massive stack of split timber, his thick duster completely drenched through. "That dampness will kill you," she warned. Dropping the timber, he stared intensely beyond the perimeter wire. Survived freezing high country rivers before. This right here is just a gentle breeze. Gathering her metal tub, she stood up tall against the bitter cold. "Sounds like you have wandered a vast territory." He calmly wiped white powder off his arms, just enough miles to realize every valley sings differently. They stepped back inside, side by side. The young boy stacked empty thread bobbins beside the fire, his tiny knuckles bright crimson. Dropping the heavy tin, the mother immediately grabbed a fresh piece of fuel. Squatting near the boy, the drifter whispered, "Ever seen a winter hare?" The child simply shook his head. "Their fur bleaches out when the freeze hits," the outlaw explained, making them near invisible unless you understand their hiding spots. Micah peeked sideways. Once spent 60 solid minutes merely tracking a single phantom print. Cunning critters. Moving to the iron stove, Catherine churned her stew. "Are we getting trapped by this blizzard?" "Likely so," the frontiersman admitted. "White banks are piling up mighty quick down in the valley." Holding his gaze across the room, she asked, "Still aiming to saddle up?" He uncoiled slowly. "That was my intention." Her reply came swift. "No need. Shelter here." He let the heavy silence hang. Despite the roaring flames, a suffocating tension filled the space. "You absolutely certain?" he muttered darkly. "My word is iron," he confirmed with a single nod. Shadows danced during supper. Their meager rations offered little, yet Catherine's discovery of forgotten sage hidden deep in the pantry resurrected the flavorless gruel. Once the boy drifted off, Silas lingered beside the embers, boots extended toward the flames, and calloused fingers resting idly. Nearby, Catherine methodically sorted garments, tracing the frayed threads of old denim. Keeping her gaze averted, she murmured, "Do you ever envision tomorrow's horizon?" He adjusted his posture. "Differently than ordinary settlers." "How so?" she pressed. "Looking beyond tomorrow's dawn just invites trouble, ensures I stay rooted." She calmly creased a cotton tunic. "Do not you crave a permanent foundation?" He shifted closer, forearms braced heavily against his thighs, perhaps provided it arrived peacefully without demanding a heavier toll than my soul could pay. Facing him directly, she challenged, "Could this cabin be that sanctuary?" Silence hung heavy. Popping logs echoed while the blizzard scratched frantically at the glass panes. "I have unearthed a fragment of it," he confessed, merely trying to map its contours. Closing the distance, she settled intimately near his radiating heat. "This homestead has space," she offered, "specifically for a man whose grit matches his sworn oaths." Their gazes locked. "Even broken men carry sins," she whispered. "Redemption lies in the aftermath." Deliberately, he extended an arm, grazing her knuckles with his, a tentative brush of skin mirroring a trespasser cautiously unlatching a gate. She remained anchored. Hearth flames stretched their silhouettes tall against the rough timber flooring. The white tempest raged relentlessly out there, erasing all trails to civilization. Yet indoors, the heavy silence suddenly thrummed with unspoken promise, a pregnant pause. The brutal freeze dominated for 48 hours. Ice dunes swallowed the perimeter wire and consumed the buckboard completely. Sunday brought dead calm, plunging the territory into an eerie stillness that mimicked a reborn earth. Trapped indoors, Catherine vigorously pounded yeast and flour against the oak slab. Forearms bared, a dusting of white powder masking the rough weathering on her palms. Silas fractured kindling near the grate, building precise wooden towers by the iron belly. A blistering heat filled the enclosure, forged entirely through relentless frontier labor and mutual survival instincts. Perched by the blaze, young Micah shaved bark off a branch Silas previously smoothed out. The child operated with deadly precision, face scrunched in pure dedication. "Does a breaking storm always steal your voice?" the drifter questioned, swiping timber shavings away. Looking up from her chore, she countered, Silence makes catching the universe's whispers much easier. Slumping his weight onto the cabin's timber frame. Must mean your ears have been straining for decades. Mute, she molded twin bread rounds. Minutes dragged before she probed. Ever consider erecting a new legacy from the ashes? Beyond just timber, a real future. Prowling across the scuffed planks, his boots made zero noise. This week alone has dragged up thoughts I had buried decades ago. Abandoning the pastries to swell, she aggressively scrubbed the grime off her skin. Why run previously? He shifted his gaze toward the icy glass, tracing the frozen tendrils creeping like dead vines across the crystalline edges. Nowhere out west ever demanded my absolute loyalty. Until now. Rising from the firelight, the boy offered his whittled branch. "Hawk," he whispered. The drifter inspected the timber closely. "Reckon it can fly." Sure did. The widow observed from the shadows, her chest aching with hard-won peace instead of frontier grief. "Kid trusts you." The gunslinger held her steady gaze. "Never laid roots anywhere before. Reckon that is changing today. Might be worth the risk." She drifted closer, breathing the sharp scent of his wood smoke-stained duster. "This frontier's got space for you. My life, too." His calloused fingers gripped hers with quiet resolve. "I ain't passing through this time. Not just till dawn. Forever." The boy shot them a wary glance before retreating into his quiet woodwork. The mother studied her son's caution. Finally, she murmured, "He knows the bitter sting of abandonment all too well. Ain't selling him a false bill of goods." The drifter's grip turned ironclad. "My word is my bond. I ain't running. I will break this dirt and bleed for this family. Every other trail is dead to me now." Hot tears stung the widow's weathered face, falling completely unrestrained. "Then stake your claim," she whispered. "Build something real." The rough-hewn stranger drew her close. She surrendered to his unyielding embrace, abandoning every defensive frontier instinct. Resting against his sturdy frame, wild prairie blossoms tangled in her rough spun collar. Beyond the timber, sunlight pierced the brutal winter frost as the howling gales surrendered to total silence. By spring, the drifter built a secure fowl pen, with the boy passing down vital survival skills of judging heavy timber and securing true plumb lines. He fortified boundary fences, sowing endless furrows of maize beside his fierce woman, dragging a salvaged wooden rocker right up against their blazing hearthstone. Their frontier wedding arrived midsummer, sheltered by ancient riverbed timber. A circuit rider made the dusty trek while the bride fastened her late matriarch's antique pin. The kid stood watch, clutching a heavy wedding band forged from solid Mexican bullion that the gunslinger hoarded through years of bloody trails. Later, they devoured a rough-hewn feast at a hand-chopped timber table, eating hearth-baked loaves and winter-foraged preserves. Not a single fiddle played, yet they stomped the raw prairie dust barefoot, laughing beneath the unforgiving western heavens. Before the next brutal freeze, heavy shingles shielded their homestead, sheltering a meticulously stockpiled survival cellar. The young boy grew rapidly, looking remarkably well-fed, speaking with unshakable grit. He finally called the outlaw Pa unprovoked. On pitch-black evenings, the hardened man guarded the front step, with his wife gripping her rough palms as they monitored the treacherous frontier fading into darkness. Their silent vigil spoke louder than any sworn frontier oath. She read his unspoken truths effortlessly, like a seasoned pioneer tracing deep grooves in ancient timber, or tracking phantom whispers riding the desert gales. As he shifted to gently kiss her weathered brow, she shut her eyes, completely surrendering to his protective grip, realizing this was not mere survival anymore. It was the terrifying, beautiful dawn of a true dynasty. On the open Dakota plains, where second chances bloomed like spring sage after the thaw, the family forged a legacy rooted in American grit and quiet hope. A home that would stand for generations as proof that even the wildest trails could lead to lasting peace.